Good evening, and welcome to the Prince Hall Think Tank, a monthly conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons where we discuss topics relative to craft masonry. My name is Brother Antonio Caffey, and I'm a very proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge 7, located in Columbus, Ohio, Brother Shimon Stone serves as worshipful master. Our lodge was started in 1852 by the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where currently the Honorable Kelvin J. Davis presides as most worshipful Grand Master. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, I would like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodges and lodges in which we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on our Facebook page or by using the chat option on YouTube. And if we have time at the end of our conversation, we will try and answer some of those questions. Lastly, while you're on YouTube, please click the subscribe so that you can stay up to date with the Think Tank. At this time, I'll let the other brethren introduce themselves. Brother Collins.
Hey guys, Ken Collins with the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, proud member of Tuxedo Lodge number 431 out of Fairfield, Alabama, where I also serve as the Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge. Want to give a shout out to my Grand Master Cordy Hawkins for the support that he gives, as well as my Worshipful Master, the Honorable Gunny Sergeant Walter Green. Brother Gillard.
Good evening. My name is Brother Dave Gillard. I'm a past master of Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Cornelius Wilson serves our worshipful master. And I also had the pleasure of serving as the worshipful grand historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Bruce A. J. serves as our Most Worshipful Grand Master. As always, it's definitely a pleasure to be a panelist on this show, and we look forward to tonight's episode.
Thanks, brothers. And I'd also like to wish a happy belated born day to Brother Gillard. He's with us and after his birthday yesterday. So please drop him a line if you haven't already done so and wish him a happy birthday. All right, so tonight's episode, our topic, we're going to begin a series entitled the Master's Class Series, Dissecting Grand Lodge Proceedings. So if you've watched any of our shows, you know that we love our Grand Lodge proceedings, especially the older ones. The older, the better. And we found that, through our individual research, and I'm sure other researchers as well, there's just so much information that can be gleaned from these records. And sometimes, though, looking at them, they can be hard to understand, decipher, and sometimes even to find. So tonight, we'll be discussing tips on how you can find and use some of these historical valuable tools. And hopefully, if you haven't already done so and trying to look through these proceedings, we will be able to give you some good tips, like I said, on how you can go about researching your own Grand Lodge proceedings, as well as other Grand Lodge proceedings as well. So without further ado, we'll start out with Brother Collins.
All right, everybody. So what we're going to talk about today is the Grand Lodge proceedings. The Grand Lodge proceedings, for anyone studying history in terms of or researching their lodge, a family member, or a particular topic in Freemasonry, the proceeding is the holy grail of the particular Grand Lodge jurisdiction. That's why it's so vital that you hear a lot of the historians talk about making sure that we preserve and keep intact our Grand Lodge proceedings. We say this specifically because there's so much information that's contained inside of the Grand Lodge proceeding, but inside of the body of it, inside of the guts of it, is typically comprised of the Grand Master's address, the Committee on Credentials. They give you an opening of what's actually happening. So they'll basically say the Grand Lodge was opened in ample form. They won't say in due form. They'll say in due form or ample form. Typically, ample forms means that it is an official opening, but what they'll also do, it's the Grand Lodge officers opening up in what would typically be a lodge. Then you'd have the Grand Master's address. Then you would have the Deputy Grand Master's address. Then you would have the Grand Secretary, Grand Treasurer. You would have the Committee on Credentials. You would have the Committee on Grievance and Appeals. You have the Committee on Charters and Dispensations, Audit Committee, and then the Committee on Grand Master's Address, where they readdress it, and then also the Committee on Returns. And then you also have in that final section, you end up seeing the actual roles of the lodge. That's where you actually find the people in the lodge. But what we're gonna do, we're actually splitting up what we do with Grand Lodge proceedings. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into a particular section, three areas that I think are very important in terms of understanding and seeing what you find in Grand Lodge proceedings. And I call this, basically the cross-referencing proceedings. So one of the major points that you end up seeing in Grand Lodge proceedings, hey, can you guys see the slide?
Yep.
Okay. So what the main section after you end up seeing the initial write-up of the proceedings is what they call the Grand Master's address. Within the body of the proceedings is the Grand Master's address, and it essentially lays out the actions that were taken by the Grand Master that year. Very simple, straightforward, what he did during the course of the year. Suspensions, visitations, and then you also have the Grand Master gives an address on what he views as took course during the course of the year. That's when you actually see the Grand Master talking about what happened fraternally. You also see he talks about what happened in the jurisdiction, how he views Masonry in the jurisdiction. But also inside of it is something that I find very important in terms of our lodges and also the identification of individuals. It's the listing of the lodges that he granted dispensations. So again, when we talk about the Grand Master's address, it's essentially just an opener to the Grand Lodge, where he gives again, has laid out his speech, his annual speech on not only the craft, but also the state, but also what he did throughout the course of the year. So that last portion that I talked about was a lodge under dispensation. So a dispensation is an instrument of the Grand Master, granting a group of Masons the ability to meet and act as Masons. Depending upon the confines of the dispensations, they can meet. They can also bury their dead. And under certain conditions, they can actually make new Masons, depending upon the actual dispensation itself. Now, the UD is written under the pen of the Grand Master, and they meet at his will and pleasure. So it's not an actual lodge under the Grand Lodge. It's the ability of some Masons to meet as Masons under the authority of the Grand Master. Now, when UD lodges are dispensated, typically under the Grand Master's address, the Grand Master writes down inside of that address what the lodge's name was that he dispensated, but also what date that they received their dispensation. And typically he'll give an individual who he assigned as worshipful master, or who he gave authority to set up the lodge, and typically where the lodge is located. So I'll give you guys a quick look at this one. This is from our 1880 proceedings. And if you take a look at the September 24th, I granted a dispensation to Brother Solomon Deary of Mount Olive Lodge, number 16, Greenville, Alabama, to install his officers. So this dispensation itself is talking about granting people authority of what to do. Now, this is a different type of dispensation other than a UD, where he's granting somebody authority to take action for him. Another one, he granted dispensation to St. Mark Lodge to hold a festival. So you can see he's actually giving the descriptions of what he's actually granting people authority to do. December 15th, I refused to grant a dispensation to Seven Stars Lodge in Cortland to pass and raise 6 brethren at one communication. Finding nothing in ancient marks that would justify me to grant a dispensation, therefore I refused. So, again, these are just a list of the dispensation and the acts that you can see that took place during the course of that year within the particular Grand Lodge. Now, another vital point that you'll see inside of Grand Lodge proceedings is called the report of the Committee on Charters and Dispensations. Once a lodge has received a dispensation from the Grand Master and they've worked for some time, the committee reports on the status of the lodge seeking to be chartered or to receive the issuance of a new charter. The new charters come into play. Reissuance of new charters come into play when there's been a lodge or the lodge caught on fire, or if someone lost it, or if there's been some type of calamity where they lost their charter, where the committee will meet. They'll either say that they're not going to charge them for a new charter, or they'll just actually grant them a new charter with, of course, a fee. Now, in terms of the UD Lodge, which applies to the Grand Lodge for a charter, that typically happens at the nearest Grand Lodge session that occurs, or it may take longer. The caveat is it essentially happens when the lodge itself has met the satisfaction of the Grand Lodge or the Grand District Deputy or the Grand Master. That's when the committee reports back on it. Because typically there's a Grand District Deputy, or in some states they call them Grand Lecturers, who actually visit the UD lodges to make sure that they're making suitable proficiency that they can actually become a freestanding lodge on its own. Now, in terms of the charter is typically dated to the date of the committee report, acceptance of the committee report. So if it's on July 17th and the Committee on Charters and Dispensation meets and the report is accepted on July 17th, that will be the date that the lodge will be chartered, and that's when it's typically signed off on. Now, there are caveats in that whole situations where the committee report passes, but they don't get the charters out to them at a later date, but they may sign it on a later date. But typically the date on the lodge's charter is on that specific date. We'll take a look at a quick slide just to see what happens. In this particular instance, this is 1880, two lodges consolidated. And lodge number 18 actually became a member of lodge number 15. And it essentially says, it's telling them what happened, and it's also telling them that they're to surrender their charter after they essentially are absorbed into the other lodge. Again, this is what these three items, the Grand Master's address, will tell you what happened during the course of the year. And that's really something that's big that's happening, where he's actually talking about social matters at certain times, but he's also talking about the state of Freemasonry within the state. But then he's also talking about the acts and the things that he did during the course of that year. And then from the Grand Master's address, he has the section on where he talks about his charters and dispensations. The dispensations are the official acts that he did, that he granted to individuals, and the dispensations for new lodges. Then we also move down to the what the UD lodges are, where they're listed, and they'll tell you who the officers are. And then you bump down again to the Committee on Charters and Dispensations. That's when you find out when a lodge was actually received their dispensation. In certain reports, they'll give you a dispensation date, but also in some reports, they'll also give you both the date it was chartered and the date that it was also dispensated. But that's all we're going to talk about today for this particular issue. But I want to get back to letting Brother Gillarm and them get started. So off to you. Back to you, Brother Kaffi.
Thanks, Mr. Collins. Brother Gillarm.
All right.
For us.
All right. Thank you for that. All right, can you see this presentation?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, good evening. My presentation, I was thinking of what to call this presentation, so I just kept it simple, and I went over and I just called it the CCFC report. So let's get into what CCFC stands for, and it stands for the Chairman Committee on Forest foreign correspondence. All right, this is a description of that position. If you check your Grand Lodge's Constitution, it may have this description may vary a little bit, but it's pretty much going to be somewhat similar. That the chairman of this committee should communicate with all jurisdictions by sending a copy of the minutes of this jurisdiction to the chairman of the committee on foreign correspondence for other jurisdictions. So basically, our CCLCs were establishing a network between what we now know as Prince Hall Grand Lodges. So at the end of a grand session, when the proceedings are printed, each CCLC will then send a copy of their proceedings to other CCLCs. To me, this is one of the most useful tools that you can have when it comes to research. One of the tools that you have at your disposal. The CCLC reports were so detailed when you start looking at the early, the 1800s to the early 1900s. The CCLCs would write so, and I'm gonna get into this to get into this shortly, but the CCLCs would go into so much detail when they would talk about other jurisdictions. So they would tell what their membership was looking like, how much money they had, if there was any issues, and they didn't hold back, which I'm gonna get into shortly. All right, some notable CCLCs was past Grandmaster William T. Boyd out of Ohio and past Grandmaster Joseph Corbin out of Arkansas. These two men were, in my opinion, were very influential during their time because of their position as CCLC. So they would correspond with so many jurisdictions, and it wasn't just Prince Hall Grand Lodges they were corresponding with. They were corresponding with Josiah Drummond, who was quote unquote part of a mainstream Grand Lodge. They were talking to Hungary, the Grand Orient of France, Supreme Council of Louisiana, the Grand Orient of Haiti. They were communicating with numerous Grand Lodges or bodies outside of what we now know as Prince Hall Masonry. And they would give their reports would be so detailed, it almost seems like you're tuned in to must-watch TV. So here's an example of 1890. It's an excerpt from an 1896 CCLC report from Georgia, and it's about Illinois. I picked this one because the year they're talking about was 1895. The grand session was held in Cairo, Illinois, which is where I was born. So yeah, I had to pick this one. But as you see here, second paragraph, it said, granted that some of the lodges have paid assessments and some scarcely nothing. And it goes into which lodges pay something. And it also later goes into the widows and orphans home that Illinois had. And as you see at the bottom, it talks about one of the most, I guess, more well-known members from that jurisdiction, which was John G. Jones, and that he tendered his resignation that year. So you will get a picture of what was going on with that Grand Lodge, and it gets, some of them are very detailed, some of them are not so detailed. This is an excerpt from Missouri's 1872 proceedings. And you see how they talk. Let's take Massachusetts, for instance. These CCLCs sometimes didn't hold their tongue. So if a Grand Lodge didn't send their proceedings, or there was something in their proceedings that didn't make sense to them, they had no issue, no restraint putting that Grand Lodge on blast. So you see what it says is this Grand Lodge shall not print her proceedings, and they put strange an exclamation point. So that would seem odd as a Grand Lodge that didn't print their proceedings. Now, I don't know if this was the actual case that Massachusetts didn't print their proceedings, or if Missouri just hadn't received a copy of it and then just basically stated that they didn't print them. This was also something that was kind of common, which goes into what Brother Collins stated about cross-referencing. The CCLC reports are a great tool that you can use for research, but there are also there will be some discrepancies, because a CCLC is going to read his proceedings and then give his opinion on what happened in those proceedings. And his opinion sometimes may not always be correct. He may exaggerate some things. He may leave some things out. So with this, you will have to the best thing is get the actual proceedings and help and start cross-referencing to see if that particular CCLC report is accurate or not, or it's just an opinionated report. And that pretty much concludes my presentation on the importance of the CCLC report. It is a great asset that you can use. The CCLC reports are interesting. If you look at some of them between certain Grand Lodges, such as my Grand Lodge and Ohio, under past Grandmaster Boyd didn't hold back. And he said what his opinion, what he thought Georgia was. There was one year in Arkansas, I believe it was Arkansas, they stated they didn't know what Georgia was doing because we had 2 grand sessions. They couldn't see the importance of why we need to have 2 grand sessions, and they concluded that we must like giving money away to the railroad station. So these reports are very interesting. Sometimes they're drama-filled. And as a historian, I'm pretty sure other historians can agree, when you pick up proceedings, you instantly turn to the CCLC report to see what was the drama going on, that year. So if you're looking to research, get you some proceedings, go to the CCLC report, and that should help you out with your research. And back to you, Brother Kathy.
Thank you, good brother. So I want to talk about a couple things. And it's interesting because I want to, a lot of it is based off of what Brother Collins and Brother Gillarm has stated during their great presentations, and really trying to look at, okay, what we used to do and what we're currently doing, and seeing if we can close the gap, if there is a gap when it comes to proceedings, and then how you can use those proceedings to do your own research. So as Brother Gillarm stated, many years ago, it was a common practice with various jurisdictions to share their Grand Lodge proceedings with other jurisdictions. I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't know really if that still happens throughout the craft the way that it used to, but we need to definitely bring that practice back, because it was a great way to just see what's going on in jurisdictions. The advent of social media, it's really allowed our Masonic circles to expand even more, which means you should be able to utilize your connections that you have online by asking brothers. Like, say if you're looking for a certain year or certain jurisdictions proceedings, go ahead and ask. You'll be surprised. There are a lot of brothers out there that collect proceedings, and they've scanned them. They have their own copies, and I've never experienced being turned down by someone that's had a proceedings and saying, well, no, I don't want to share that with you. Brothers, because we all realize how important that is, and how what one answer that you may find from looking at those proceedings. So if you're in various Masonic groups, go ahead and feel free to ask and see if they have proceedings from a particular year within your jurisdiction. The Grand Lodge of Iowa, the library there, both the physical place and also what they have online. They actually have an online catalog. It's also a great resource to look for old proceedings as well. I know years ago, initially, that was one of the few places that a lot of brothers would go to, because they also got a hold of a lot of proceedings, both quote unquote mainstream and Prince Hall lodges, Prince Hall Grand Lodges as well. So that's another great resource when it comes to trying to, because that's sometimes it can be hard trying to track down certain proceedings if your own Grand Lodge may not have a complete record from when it was instituted to present day. It may not it may not have the proceedings. So that's another great resource to have. State and local historical societies. You can contact your local, state, or historical or state, local or state historical society. They often have a lot of old and great information about your Grand Lodge as well. Here in Ohio, at one point in time, we actually had a relationship with the Ohio Historical Society, and their center that's located in Columbus off of 17th Avenue by the fairgrounds. They have a lot of great information in there about our particular Grand Lodge. So that's another place that you can start, by contacting your local and state historical societies. We think that our Grand Lodge proceedings should only be within our particular organization, or within our jurisdiction or some other jurisdictions, but you'll be surprised at some of those older proceedings and where you can find some at. So I'd urge that you get in contact with them as well. So we have the proceedings, and as I say this, we have all of these old proceedings. One thing, while you're researching them, if you come across them, and if you're in a position to do so within your Grand Lodge, either to do so or to voice your concerns or suggestions, one thing that we definitely need to do is, with our older proceedings, we need to make sure that we're putting things in place to preserve those old proceedings as well. Some of our Grand Lodges, that if God forbid a fire, flood, or whatever occurs, it would wipe out a lot of history, and we need to do a better job as a fraternity in preserving some of these historical documents. So while researching our old proceedings is very important, like I said, is illustrated by Brother Collins and Brother Gillarm's excellent presentations, then we need to make sure that we're preserving them just as well. So here's another great opportunity that you can work with your local and state historical society and ask them for some assistance. Theoretically, you could get a scanner, bring a scanner in and scan all of those proceedings. But if we're talking about like original proceedings that were either written out or even if it's just old, we need to be careful with how we handle those particular documents. And while you think scanning may not be necessarily a bad thing, you'd be surprised at the damage that you can do by doing that. So by working with your local and state historical society, they're experts in making sure that those documents are preserved, and they know how to scan and take care of those things by the best method. So again, great opportunity to work with them, to take some of those old documents to them, to get an electronic copy, so that again, if something happens to the physical location where those proceedings may be, or any old Grand Lodge document is held, we still have some proceedings that exist in the electronic world. So yeah, just trust me, it's worth it. Now, that being said, a lot of state and local and state historical societies, they're not going to do it for free, and there is a cost involved in digitizing these files, because we're talking about literally proceedings from the 1800s. These are historical documents, and you'll be surprised at the number of grants out there that's available to organizations like ours, that you can get some, or if not all, of those costs covered. The National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal government agency, they offer a lot of grants to scan historical relevant documents. So if you go to the website, www.neh.gov, that's neh.gov, and look under the grants tabs, there are a lot of they have a lot of grants out there that you can apply for, where then you can go and it can give you the money, and then you can work with the historical society or some company that does that professionally. You can work with them, and then they can cover that cost for you. All right. Lastly, regarding proceedings, it's we all, again, love our old proceedings, but we need to make sure that our focus this evening has been on the old proceedings, but we must, make sure that we're leaving good records for future generations of craftsmen as well. So the people that are coming after us, and if you're in a position to do so, make sure your Grand Lodge or your organization's proceedings are truly telling the story of what happened within your jurisdiction. Reading older proceedings and compare them to now and our newer proceedings. Brothers in the 1800s, they truly knew how to tell a story. There have been a number of proceedings that I've read where I actually felt like I was in the room when something was experienced, something was going on, from just the atmosphere, how brothers were feeling. It's beautiful, So as compared to proceedings during some of the Grand Lodge sessions that I've been blessed to be in over the last 20 some odd years, and getting the proceedings later, and not ask myself, well, when did all this take place? And not saying that it's drastically different, but it's just, I don't think we're as detailed now as we were then. And my fear is that, so many years later, when brothers are looking back on our time within the craft and reading the proceedings, they're not really going to get a vivid picture of what was taking place. So again, by working with your Grand Lodge secretary, or even just bringing it to someone's attention. And I think that the best way to do that is by getting one of those older proceedings from the 1800s and having someone read them and saying, are we still documenting what goes on during our Grand Lodge sessions the way that these brothers did back then? And if we're not, why? And, can we or should we start doing this? And really, harp on the fact, or really hammer home the whole idea of 50, 60, 100 years from now, brothers needing to, really to know what's going on within our jurisdiction. So I didn't have a, slideshow presentation, anything like my other two good brothers did, but I just wanted to talk about and discuss those two things in regards to our older proceedings, and really, how we can do, what we can do, how we can find them, we can do to take care of them, and then how can we make sure that our current proceedings, it really reflects what we're going on. Hopefully, whatever brothers sitting in our seats 50, 60 years from now, operating a think tank, they'll be able to look back at some proceedings and say, oh, okay, this is what went on during this particular time. So, all right. That being said, any other comments from any of the brothers?
Yeah, I wanted to hop in on what Dave was talking about in terms of the CCFC report, but also, Tonio, what you talked about in terms of the ability to share proceedings. And I'll say it for our particular Grand Lodge. I was working my butt off trying to find our proceedings, and we had gaps. We actually had some gaps in some of the years where we didn't have those actual proceedings. So, and we actually had a year where we didn't know who the Grand Master was, because there was a Grand Lodge consolidation of two Grand Lodges. So for that particular year, the name of that Grand Master was never actually in our records. And what I did, we have such a, actually I could say we're actually blessed to have such a good network of historians amongst the Prince Hall Grand Lodges. Tom Van Buren sent me his 1876 proceedings, which actually gave the name of our Grand Master during that particular year. Dave would send me some proceedings to give me some information. And then, Tony, I remember when I found the 1884 proceedings for your Grand Lodge, I scanned them and sent them up to him. So, and then I happened to come into, like I say, out of the blue, I actually got a great plethora Grand Lodge proceedings, and I'm able to share it with a number of different Grand historians or guys that are actually interested in the research. So it actually serves as a way to connect all of us. But you cannot get away from the ability to share proceedings, but you can't get away with the ability to be able to answer the questions that some people may have regarding their proceedings. Now, one thing that, Antonio, you did say that I just want to piggyback on is we know that the lodges today do not print the lodge rolls inside of their Grand Lodge proceedings. If they do, they're few and far between. However, I think it's imperative for the lodges to actually print out a roll just for their books and to keep adding it year by year. Who was there, who they made, who they suspended, who they expelled, who got their initiated pastor rates, and actually having that. Because when you compile that, it actually becomes a small history book in terms of what happened during the year. That way, you won't have to actually filter through and pilfer through the secretary's reports. But that's all I had to add. And like I said, that's great, Dave and Antonio, the stuff that you guys added.
All right. That's one thing I want to add. I get asked this question a lot about how do I even get my hands on proceedings. And I believe YouTube brothers have already covered it. One way is just asking, various groups. Between myself, Ken, Antonio, Curtis Black, Alex Benton, so numerous brothers. I mean, we got access to a lot of stuff, and we share information. Brother Tim Johnson, out of New Mexico, brothers have access to all this stuff, and they will be willing to share. Other avenues that you may have, Brother Caffey stated, you got the Grand Lodge of Iowa, in their library. Yeah, the Amistad Research Center in Louisiana. That's a good asset. And for me, sometimes it's just luck. I happened to go to the University of Georgia a couple of years ago, and they had several years of our Grand Lodge proceedings. So maybe if you check your local university and in their historical section, they may have some of your Grand Lodge proceedings or some Grand Lodge proceedings. So those are just a few ways that you may be able to get your hands on it. And when you do, sit there. It's not an easy task. It is not the most fun task. You're gonna read pages and pages and pages of proceedings just to find one good thing. So it is a very lengthy task. So you have to have a real passion for this. And if you pick up proceedings and you don't find anything interesting, don't give up. Just keep picking up years. Eventually, you're gonna find something, and that's gonna light that spark, and that's gonna keep you digging and keep you engaged in reading and dissecting these proceedings. That's all I got, Brother Caff.
Because you're looking at one thing, and then you put something down or something it's a great, almost like you're a detective, basically. You're doing your detective work, and you're investigating this source, and you're trying to, as Ken said, cross-referencing that with another Grand Lodge proceedings, and you put all that together, and then you're able to tell a story. And then what's most amazing too, especially about the early proceedings, is you're reading. I always say, read those proceedings, but also read about the history of that time period too, and fit those proceedings within that particular time period, and because that will help answer a lot of questions as well. Why were the brothers feeling this way? Why was this discussed during the Grand Lodge session? Oh, okay, this was going on outside of the fraternity that had an impact on the fraternity itself. So it's a lot of things that, when you're choosing to what I call live this life of a researcher, that you can do to really put things together, and then put out some of your, just some of your findings. I know when I'm down at the Grand Lodge sometimes, and I'll be reading something, I'll get excited about it. I'm like, well, let me let brothers know about this. People may already know about it, people may not, but you never know, who's reading your post or reading your comments or something, and then you may help that person answer a question that they may have, or it may then spark another question that you never even knew about. And then it sends you on another journey. So it's definitely a labor of love when it comes to Grand Lodge proceedings. All right. So with that, I also we didn't have too many questions tonight. I do want to give Sister Christine Hackett a shout out. With some of her great comments tonight on our YouTube chat. So for tonight, I wish I knew you were going to give out this great information. I would have put your face on the flyer, and you would have been our YouTube special panelist tonight. So thank you for you giving us some great advice. So thank you for that. All right. So let's go to closing thoughts. Brother Gilmar.
All right. Start off with this one thing. Give thanks for all the birthday love that everybody showed me. I think when I looked up, there was probably well over 300 something posts, and I can't even count the texts and phone calls and inboxes. So I definitely appreciate it. Before I forget, because I have a bad memory, I have to give a special shout out to Brother Stanley Brooks from the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado. Sent me a copy of their history book. I definitely appreciate this, brother. I'll be reaching out to you shortly, let you know how that I received it. And another one, can't forget about Brother Morgan. He's on vacation. He's been, even while he's on vacation, he's still digging. And, it never stops with this. He's trying to relax. He's supposed to be relaxing. He's probably getting beat up because he's supposed to be relaxing. And yet he's still in archives researching. So that's definitely a hard-working brother. He does a lot of stuff behind the scenes for us to help build the Prince Hall think tank, just to help build us as historians. So definitely got to give him a shout out. And lastly, it's baseball season, so everybody should have on their Cardinals jerseys, hats, flyers, whatever it takes. We're gonna go ahead and win the championship this year. It's already a done deal. So if you're cheering for your team, just go ahead and stop now and go ahead and join the Cardinals bandwagon, and we can keep this moving. And we also get ready for the next NBA season. And you know what time it is for the Knicks. So thank you for that. No, before I forget, Brother Bird, I haven't forgot about you. And that hateful post that you put on my page was something regarding Scottie Pippen and the alleged dunk that he did on Patrick Ewing. So I haven't forgot about you all either. So, but as always, thank you all for your support, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
All right, Brother Collins.
Well, as usual, we have to close it out in ample form. The Prince Hall Think Tank would not be here without Brother Antonio Caffey. I have to give Brother Caffey a great shout out. And Alabama would be nothing without Georgia. But no, that's that. You guys know that's just a part of it. That's just a part of it. You got to play your sweet on Alabama.
Thank you, bro.
But no, I had to throw in two names, a couple of names actually. Brother Tahuti Evans out in Roundtree, out of District of Columbia. Brother Jeff Kennedy, actually on the outside had one of the largest collection of Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio proceedings that he actually gifted to me to be able to scan and get the electronic versions of them. That guy was a godsend. And I say a godsend, I'm talking 1860, was it 1861, all the way up through almost 1990, 1900. So he had a solid collection of proceedings, and also brother Curtis Black out there in in Texas, the country of Texas. This guy, I'm telling him about my past grandmaster that moved out there, and he calls me on the phone saying, "Hey, brother Collins, yeah, I found Simon Nash. He's buried in Galveston." And he actually finds one of my past grandmaster, our first past grandmaster, who was living out in Texas. They went out there and started some of the New York right bodies. So, we have pockets of brothers that are helping around across the country. Like I said, this type of networking and working together to get this information out, it's a godsend. You guys stay in those proceedings and actually read the proceedings. Don't take somebody's word for it, because in the immediate future, you're going to start seeing some things come up where some long-standing things that have been written down have actually been wrong. And there's nothing wrong with correcting our history, because it's done on individuals' lives, it's done on families, it's done on organizations, it's done on countries. So, just keep working together, have some flexibility in your mind, your thinking, and remember, if you can, pick up a book and read it. And after you get done reading it, pass it along to somebody else. Have a good one, guys. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, good brothers. And again, as brother said, shout out to Brother James Morgan, who's on vacation. That's why he couldn't be with us. But if you're friends with James on Facebook, when he goes on vacation or anywhere, he basically brings everyone with him, because he's posting about it. And like the brother said, he's digging even when he's on vacation. So thank him for that, and he's missed this evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As we've stated earlier in a lot of our episodes, it's important that the history of Prince Harbor Freemasonry is told correctly and with verifiable sources. As as Brother Collins just alluded to, there's been a lot of misinformation in the past regarding our history. And, you've had researchers and jurisdictions base the history, that they put out to the craft and the public on, what's now determined to be some faulty research. As historians, it's our job to correct those possible errors and tell the correct story, no matter whose feelings may get hurt in doing so. So to that end, the Prince Hall Think Tank stands committed to making sure that good, sound research is out there. Again, thanks for joining us tonight. We hope you gained a little insight, and we hope you join us for future broadcast of the Prince Hall Think Tank. Go Cavs, and have a good evening. And remember, let's teach masonry in our lodges. Good evening.